Hey, true crime fanatics, this is Claire.
And I'm Andy.
You're tuned in to the Homicide Hobbies podcast, which is a podcast for people who love to hear about the horrendous crimes that people commit. Enjoy. Which one are we doing today?
Our sumbitch this week is Charles Frederick Albright. He was born August 10th, 1933 in Amarillo, Texas. Later in life, the media would dub him the Dallas Ripper. Charles took trophies from his victims, and since you did so good with the last time I asked you, Claire, you want to take a wild guess as to what Charles's trophy was?
Boobs.
Well, you're just going to have to wait, because I ain't telling you yet. So, a little bit on Charles's back history. He was given up for adoption by his birth mother shortly after he was born. He was put in an orphanage, but was soon adopted. He was 3 months old when his mother, adoptive parents, her name is Dell, and the father's name was Frederick, and their last name was Albright. Now, Dell was a school teacher, and her husband worked as a grocer. They loved their son, like their adopted son. It was their son.
Thought she was a looker.
When he was under 1 year old, she would get frustrated with him, and she'd either lock him in a dark room or a closet.
That's not discipline. That's still abusive. Not a hot mess.
She would also tie him to his bed as a form of punishment throughout his childhood, but starting at under 1, yes, she would restrain him to the bed, especially if he refused his nap. She would just tie him to the bed.
He's 1.
Right. So I feel like it's fairly simple to stick a baby in their crib and just walk away, but
apparently
whatever.
It's also fairly simple to strap him down.
Apparently. She would also spank him.
She was using her Girl Scout. She was using her Girl Scout skills.
She would also spank him excessively if he refused to drink his milk. So I couldn't find I guess when he would be crying from getting his ass beat, she'd shove it in his mouth. And then she would also tell Charles, and this is where I say she's a bit on the crazy side. This case kind of reminded me of the Green River Killer, because Dell would tell Charles that his father, Fred, was greedy with sex, and that whenever Fred, who is her husband, would see her in their bedroom in her bra and panties, he would grab at her, and she wanted to make sure that Charles didn't grow up to behave in such a manner. I was like,
so she is okay. A looker.
I suppose. But she wanted Charles to be extremely successful, and seeing as how she's an elementary school teacher, she would go above and beyond to work with him, so much so that he skipped 2 grade levels. Charles was extremely intelligent. He naturally picked up on anything that he even tried, such as playing the piano, tap dancing. Different languages came easy for him to learn. He even tap danced at the famous Texas Theater. He learned all the constellations. Like he's a smart little feller. And Dell would pretend that Charles was a girl when he was little.
What's with these ladies?
She would dress. I have no idea, but she would pretend he was a girl.
It's not even the first, second, or third time we've been like, you're just gonna be a little girl, until people realize that you're not.
And not to sound like an asshole here, but if she was that hard up to have a little girl, it's not like she birthed him. Why didn't they just adopt a girl?
Maybe they were fresh out.
Okay. Well,
there was a waiting list.
She would put...
They're like, we don't have any of them little girls in stock today, but we got this little boy right here if you want him to take. Half off.
Well, she would put him in dresses and give him dolls to play with.
What year was this?
And by now, it's like the 1940s.
So around that time, didn't the wife not need to participate with the adoption, where like the feller could just come home? Look at what I got you. And maybe
I don't know. From the way it sounds, she was kind of a control freak, and Fred just did whatever the hell she told him to do.
He could have surprised her for her birthday. She'd be like, but I wanted a little girl. And he's like, here, just put a bonnet on him.
It's possible. Well, I can tell you that later, after she's dead and Charles is grown, that's when he actually bonds with his father, because she prevented them from having any sort of like real father-son relationship.
Because she didn't want him to grow up being handsy.
Probably so. It's reported that Dell was obsessed with cleanliness, and she would make Charles change his clothes 4 to 5 times a day in order to keep him clean.
How many times did he shit himself?
Right. But she was afraid that he would get polio from poop. So she would take him to the polio ward of the local hospital and make him observe the struggles of the patients suffering from polio.
Well, around that time, they wouldn't know what caused it.
Yeah. Well, that's what she was scared of. So she made him change his clothes every time he got dirty.
Well, can you imagine how scary it was for parents to just not know if their kid would get polio?
Yeah.
She had to go get one secondhand, and she can't just crank out another. She didn't even get the one she wanted.
Much like some of the other young men, like you've pointed out, that we've already discussed, that were forced to dress like little girls and subjected to excessive punishment, Charles does go on to be an American serial killer with convictions in burglary, forgery, murder, and theft.
He turned his education into something not good.
Correct. Now, I done already told you a little bit about Charles as a youngin', but when he was around 11, he was gifted his first gun from his wonderfully stable ma. He went around killing small animals with this wonderfully age-appropriate weapon, and his ma would sit there and help her sweet little boy kill and stuff them dead animals. Dell taught Charles how to use different tools on those animals, such as knives for cutting the skulls off or open, spoons for scooping out the animal's brains, and scalpels for cutting out the eyeballs from their sockets.
She had an interest in taxidermy.
No, she did not. She said he did. So Charles,
you know what? That was awful nice of her to pick up on what he enjoyed and made it a family event.
Mm-hmm. So Charles was most fascinated with the final touch of his taxidermy skills, and he was kind of obsessed with the eyes. He would stay for hours and stare at the fake eyeballs at the local taxidermy shop, browsing the fake eyeballs for hours, because while his parents were not rich, they definitely weren't struggling, but Dell was super cheap. There's reports of her literally going through the garbage at the butcher shop and digging through the bones that the butcher would set aside for the dogs to use in soup rather than pay for stuff. She would take it out of the trash. She's very frugal.
She was resourceful.
Dell told her boy that them fake eyeballs, those fancy glass peepers for them animals, were expensive, so she bought him buttons. So while he took the time to very carefully taxidermy the critters,
but at the same time, he's learning. He wouldn't get the expert level stuff for a novice. He could practice with the buttons.
Right. So unlike them other little boys who like to go play on the playground or play some baseball, he would just go stare at them glass peepers, wishing that he could have those for his many, many dead animals. Now, by 13, Charles had already been arrested for aggravated assault and petty theft. Basically, he was trying to steal. Somebody tried to stop him, and he assaulted the person trying to stop him from stealing from them. When Charles was 14 or 15, Dell and Fred were so proud of Charles, they went out and they purchased a piece of property in their neighborhood right down the street from their home and gifted it to Charles.
So he could have hunting land?
It was a house. He had his own house by the time he was 14 or 15.
They wanted him to move out.
Pretty much. I figure he had so many dead critters.
No, turns out she started to enjoy that groping.
Yeah. Charles, as a 15-year-old, sold that property and used the money to buy more lots to flip them. And the Dallas Times-Herald published a story about him under the headline of World's Youngest Real Estate Man Amassing Nest Egg for College. So he made it in the papers because he started flipping properties at 15 years old.
There's also not a whole lot to discuss.
By 15, the Smarty Pants graduated from high school and enrolled in North Texas University. And at that point, he decided he'd go ahead and start frequenting them prostitutes and got himself a bout of crabs.
For dinner? Or the pubic variety?
On the pubic variety. He got himself a real dirty girl.
And a snack.
Ew. I don't think the snacks are supposed to be creepy crawly.
You don't know.
I do know. Your snacks should not be creepy crawly. Even if you want to eat worms, they shouldn't be alive still.
Why not? It's like sushi.
Sushi still is not alive.
But I'm saying it's fresh.
It shouldn't be alive when you are consuming it. You're not gonna win this one. Just let it go. Dave, if Claire makes you dinner and it's moving, don't eat it. Run.
Now you just ruined his supper.
Okay, anyway.
It was supposed to be a surprise.
I'm sure it would be when it bites back. Charles decided while he was in college that he wanted to become a surgeon, so he enrolled in some pre-med classes. At this point, Charles was 17 years old, and he was found with $380 of stolen petty cash, 2 handguns, and a rifle that he stole from some store. Now, Dell tried to go to the store owner and reimburse them for the things that Charles had stolen. She also tried to persuade the judge to let her be Charles's lawyer.
What?
Yeah.
It's not a volunteer effort.
Charles would complain that his mother hovered so much that it gave him a headache. And you know what Dell's response was? No, you just need glasses. And she forced him to start wearing glasses even though he had 20/20 vision. So he's like, my mom gives me a headache. She needs to back the fuck off. And she's like, no,
both an
just wear these
attorney
glasses.
And an ophthalmologist.
Yeah. So he was sentenced to 1 year because of the whole stealing the guns and all that.
Did she ask for a discount if she shared his sale?
No, but she was so distraught. She asked the judge if she could do his sentence for him.
Not how that works, lady.
It sure isn't. He spent his 18th birthday in jail, and he only served 6 months before he was released. However,
they fall in with a bad crowd.
He seemed to have gotten his shenanigans together because he had to drop out of school due to the charge because obviously if you're not attending classes, it shouldn't be doesn't make sense to stay enrolled.
Doesn't seem like it's a mystery you'd have to attend.
Right.
But so I imagine when he gets out of the end of his doctoring dreams.
No. So when he gets out of jail, he re-enrolled in pre-med classes, but this time at Arkansas State Teachers College. It was reported that an incident took place with Charles where he cut out the eyes of a photograph of a friend's ex-girlfriend and pasted them onto the photos of that man's new girlfriend because he preferred the ex-girlfriend's eyes over the current girlfriend's.
At least he didn't pluck them out.
Yeah. He also took copies of her eyeballs and posted them on posters, walls, on the ceiling, in the bathroom. They were just cut out eyeballs all over the dorm room.
Who doesn't do that?
Charles also broke into a co-ed's dorm room and stole nude photos of her. In 1952, Charles began dating
Hold up. You can't just coast over that. He did what?
He broke into a girl's dorm room and stole naked pictures of her.
I'm going to ask, why did she have naked photos of herself in her dorm room?
So I know we reference too many movies, but I totally picture Forrest Gump with Jenny when she posed and had
But those were published. He didn't have to sneak in to get those.
Right, I understand that, but I don't know if this girl posed and just had copies.
Then it's not stealing.
No, he took them from her room. I don't know if she posed for pictures and had the pictures herself. I don't know where these pictures came from. I don't know why she had them, but he broke into somebody's dorm room and stole naked pictures. So
why did he give up the prostitutes? Because he had to save for college?
No, he's still dabbling in the prostitutes.
It just he called it quits for a little bit because the crabs left a bad taste in his mouth.
It's disgusting. Anyway, by 1952, Charles began dating a good girl named Betty Nestor. Now, she worked at the dean's office at their college. He convinced her to steal the master keys that were for the school, and he made his own set. Then she put the keys back.
Is that how he's passing his exams?
No, but we'll get there. So while Charles attended the college, he was a bit of a class clown. He screwed it off a lot. I think he was enjoying the freedom of being away from Dell, since she was such a control freak. He enjoyed wearing pants.
Just so we're clear,
fraternity
that was
boy.
A weird exclamation.
Well, she put him in dresses. I don't know what age she stopped making the boy wear dresses, but
he still does.
You figure he was so advanced that he's graduated from high school by 15. He's already flipping his own houses.
He was so advanced, he was the husband and the wife of his own relationship.
It probably would have saved people.
And they still got into arguments.
Over who wore it better.
Mm-hmm.
Say yes to the dress. While Charles was attending the college, like I said, he was a class clown. He screwed off, but he was also considered like that stereotypical all-American fraternity boy, and he was a prankster. He went to
prostitutes?
No, just, the stereotypical fraternity boy, how they get the stereotype that they're screwing around all the time. They get away with stuff.
Turns out if you get a pout of the crabs, it's not just a thing people say. Turns out it might have some factual evidence.
Anyway, Charles was an all-American or an all-star football player. And for his shenanigans, an example of them, one time he snuck into the home economics building and stole food out of the refrigerator and cooked up a bunch of steaks for him and his buddies. And it just got written off as like, oh, boys will be boys.
He was hungry.
And then
they understood it.
And then there was another time that he broke into the physics professor's office in the middle of the day. And I guess this physics professor said that this exam that was coming up, they could not steal the test answers. So he made it his mission to steal them. He picked the cabinet lock, stole the physics test, made a copy of it, and then put the test back.
I figured out why he didn't get in trouble for doing the steaks. Somebody tried one and was like, we can't. He seared this one really good. You can't get him in trouble for that.
He shared.
Frankly, yeah, it's a work of art. I told you he was going to use those. I told you he was going to use those keys to pass tests.
Mm-hmm. He also sold the test to his buddies, like gave them a copy.
Of course. He's an entrepreneur.
Sure is. He's a real swell feller that decided to share. He also set the chemistry teacher's dress on fire one time, supposedly by accident.
He wore it first. Maybe they wore the same outfit on that day.
Just to be clear to our fans, he was not cross-dressing.
You don't know.
I do know. There's pictures of him.
Oh, every hour of the day? You don't know if he went home and was like Silence of the Lambs styling it, just dancing in front of the mirror in his dresses.
Well, I can tell you when he was in his chemistry class, he was not wearing a dress.
You don't know.
He might have set her dress on fire because he wished he could have it on.
Or maybe he recognized it and his mom had donated it.
Perhaps. He's like, oh, that's mine. Anyway.
Jealous rage. And then he's going to collect her eyeballs.
Anyway. Charles was too bored to study, so he was failing his classes. And he didn't want Dell to find out. So like you said, he used them stolen keys to go into the teachers' rooms, not to actually take the tests and pass them, but just to go into their grade books and change his grades.
That's even lazier.
It is. Like, it's so much lazier. And then in 1954, Charles was 20 years old, and he married Betty just after Christmas.
Who the hell's Betty?
I told you he started dating that good girl who gave him them keys.
But was that before or after he stole the nudie pictures from somebody else and got his crabs?
It's like all within the same, like his freshman and sophomore year in college. He met her, they start dating, she steals keys, he's just fucking around in school, not doing what he's supposed to be doing, tormenting people. His enrollment at the Arkansas State Teachers College didn't last long because he would soon be expelled in 1961 from this college because he got caught stealing equipment and he was like stashing it in a different part of the building because he was going to sell it.
There's that entrepreneurship again.
Sure is. And much like some of the other fellers that I've talked about, Charles felt entitled to his degree that he was working so hard towards But them stupid scholars kept denying him by kicking him out of schools. So he decided he was going to make his own degrees. Charles slipped into 3 different offices.
It's just a piece of paper. He'll print it himself.
He slipped into 3 different offices at Texas State and grabbed all the necessary forms, made copies of them, added his own name, forged the necessary signatures, and then put all the forged documents back into the files so that if anybody ever asked to see a copy of his stuff from the school, they would find it. So he even stole the registrar's typewriter so that the
it's really
text on the documents
it's really too bad
would
he
be
didn't
the same.
use his brain in a more productive manner.
Right? Soon after that, Betty gave birth to their daughter. If you haven't noticed a pattern, Charles seems to have a real short attention span. He struggles to hold a job. Surprise, surprise. He worked several odd jobs, including a basket.
It's more of he's not so much a hard worker, he's trying real hard to get out of doing whatever he's supposed to be doing.
I think he suffered real bad, like had a severe case of ADHD.
No, I think he's
lazy. And just
lazy.
Could not stay focused.
It's not focused because he focuses real hard on not doing the work. Because he thinks there's a shortcut. Oh, I won't do the schooling. I'll steal. Well, I won't even steal the test and take it. I'll just fudge the grades. And, oh, you know what? They won't let me in school. Here, I'll just make my own degree.
Yeah.
Those are not normal processing of workarounds.
How to handle them situations.
That's not handling it. That's recreating a whole separate other thing.
It was his way of handling his bad decisions. Was dealing
with
making
more
drama.
More bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. He didn't learn anything from the prostitute.
Well, he did. He learned to bathe. Or at least check to see if them pubes moved on their own first.
That's why he wore the glasses.
No, his mom made him. Apparently she gave her the crabs.
She's like, your laundry was moving.
It's disgusting.
Your Peepers ain't working the way they should. Put these on.
Anyway, some of the odd jobs that Charles worked, he worked as a baseball bat manufacturer, a carpenter.
Hold on a whim. A baseball bat manufacturer? You're going to have to elaborate on that one. He's just whittling bats one at a time?
Well, he worked at warehouses that manufactured baseball bats. I don't know what all that entailed in the 1960s, but that's apparently what he did.
Making baseball bats.
Apparently so. And also on a whim, he decided to go to beauty school and got his beautician's license to become a hairstylist.
He really missed his dress.
Charles was also an illustrator. He worked as a designer for a company that made airplanes. And on a dare, he drove to a Mexican border town and trained to become a bullfighter. He was all over the place.
Well, that was what he learned from the prostitute.
By 1965, Charles and his wife Betty separated because she was fed up with the fact that he just couldn't get his shit together.
He got crabs again.
Their divorce, by the way, wasn't finalized for another decade. Like, they separated in 1965, but it wasn't finalized.
Well, turns out he had to sit still long enough for them to file it.
Turns out it took him about 5 years to sign each part of his name. In 1968, Charles was 36 at this point when he took his handy-dandy fake degrees and got a job teaching at a high school. His credentials he presented showed that Charles had a master's degree in biology from East Texas State University, and that he was currently working on another master's.
He just ran out of ink.
So he was working on another master's degree in counseling and guidance. He was also supposedly about to enter East Texas State University's PhD program in biology. And the high school, Crandall High School, Charles was everyone's favorite science teacher. He was also the football coach, and he showed off to his students by reciting in Latin the scientific names for every plant that they would come across when they were outside on their little strolls.
He was just making that shit up and no one could call him on it.
That's when I was thinking. I was like, yeah, that seems like a lot of work for this feller to sit there and learn all these plants' names. And they were just like, no, I don't believe it. Eventually, Charles was placed on probation. Somehow, it was discovered that his degrees were all forged. The police arrested him for
Because
that.
somebody caught him making up flower names.
Well, Fred ended up getting fired from that high school when he was caught for the forgeries, and he was sentenced to 1 year probation only because
they heard about the crabs.
East Texas State University found it embarrassing.
It is. No one checked his credentials.
Well, that it was so easy for him to forge the documents.
They should be embarrassed. So, it's not like printers were readily available.
So they agreed to just probation for Charles because they didn't want it in the media that he was able to forge these degrees so easily.
They didn't want all the other kids to look at him as inspiration.
Yeah, how to get out of paying them tuition fees.
Just buy you a high-quality printer.
He didn't even do that. He stole their typewriter and then put it back.
It's true.
Up next for Charles, he was given a 2-year prison sentence for being caught stealing hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise from a hardware store. Again, he only served 6 months and was released. By 1981, Charles is now 48 years old, and his mother, Dell, passed away. After she died, Charles decided to try to find his birth mother. And Dell used to tell Charles that she was a brilliant law student, and from what I gather, because I did kind of try to...
She wasn't the prostitute that gave him the crabs, was it?
Ew and no. So from what I gather, she was 16 years old when she got pregnant, and her parents told her she was not capable of taking care of an infant by herself and forced her to give Charles up for adoption. Now, later in her life, she did get married and she was a nurse, and Charles did find his mom, and he was thrilled. He even introduced her to his father, Fred, and his daughter that he had with his ex-wife. So, but there's nothing really comes of that. It's just, it is what it is. Now, Charles decided to dedicate himself to St. Bernard's Catholic Church after he got out of prison, and he's getting his life turned around. He's going to dedicate himself to the Catholic Church in East Dallas, and he met him a family that he befriended in 1979.
Did he forge paperwork that made him part of the family?
No, he's just friends with that family. And after he decided to start singing in that their church choir, the church people loved him. I guess he
had the voice of an angel.
He was real social and easy to talk to, so people he had one of them faces.
A face hole that made you want to talk to it?
I don't know how the priest didn't get offended, but Charles put himself... Well, he became almost like an assistant priest, and he would stand up at the altar in a robe reading passages out of the Bible, and he would even insist on helping the priest do communion. So, like, he just inserted himself up in a lead role.
No, and he just wanted to put things in people's mouths.
He did. He was known around the church as Good Old Charlie. He was known to give people that were down on their luck just $100 just to try to help them out.
That's a lot.
It was for back then. So that family that
couldn't have been paying too much in alimony.
Well, that family that he met and became friends with, he would bring them steaks, and he would dress up as Santa, and he would give their little...
Did they come from the home ec department?
I don't know. So he would give their kids presents for Christmas. And then one night while he was visiting the home of this family in 1981, Charles sexually molested the little girl. She was 9.
Ew.
Yeah. He was prosecuted.
Suddenly I don't feel bad for his bout. Suddenly I don't feel bad for his bout with crabs.
Well, the second I started talking about him, you shouldn't have had any kind of feeling sorry for him because he's a bad boy.
Technically, you didn't tell me who we were talking about.
I sure did.
Not as the bad guy. You like to lead me on with that one case where the 2 girls, and I thought that they murdered their mom in the basement.
Oh, no, you thought the dad had her tied up in the basement. Anyway, that's hide and go peek for those that are not loyal fans and ain't listened to all them other cases yet.
There's still time to correct the errors in your ways.
Sure is. Go find it. Anyway, so Charles pled guilty to molesting the 9-year-old, and he pled guilty to knowingly and intentionally engaging in sexual intercourse with a girl under the age of 14. He was 51 years old at that time.
Ew.
So ew. The Lucky Stone Beach only received probation.
That's because everybody was diddling kids.
Well, the family didn't want the little girl to be stereotyped, so they agreed to just not have it go, right? They agreed to not have it go to trial since he was pleading guilty to this if he got just probation. I just, my brain hole was like, what in the actual fuck? He had sex with your 9-year-old daughter. He raped your 9-year-old
but that
daughter.
Would have made her ruined.
Yeah. So
she would have never had a good marriage.
He would later say that he only pled guilty to avoid the hassle of a trial, but that he was truly innocent. I call bullshit on that one. Now, in 1984, he applied to be the leader. Sorry, it's not funny, okay?
Pedophiles Anonymous?
This case is like the stereotype of all things yucky. But in 1984, he applied to be the leader in a Boy Scouts of America troop. But because of his criminal record, he was rejected. Because I guess you can't be a registered child molester. Or I don't think that they even had a register at that point. But you can't be a child molester.
Or he showed up to drop off his application wearing his favorite dress.
Maybe. Now, somewhere in this time frame, Fred Albright, Charles's adopted father, dies, leaving Charles with around $100,000, which still is a lot of money now, but it was even more money back then. Plus, all of their real estate properties they owned, which I couldn't find out how many they actually owned. I just know they had several properties. Several of them they had rented out and were getting income off of those rentals. So Charles inherits all of that. In 1985, in Arkansas, Charles met a woman named Dixie Austin. He was absolutely in love with her. Dixie was shy, she was a widow, and Charles wooed the hell out of Dixie. He took her to fancy dinners, they bonded over talks of art and nature. Soon, Charles invited Dixie to go move in with him. And eventually, after she moved in, paying all his bills and supporting him. Because at this point in time, Charles was delivering newspapers in the wee hours of the morning. And while he was out delivering those newspapers, he would visit the local prostitutes. And he paid for their services with his inheritance money and that rental property money. That way, Dixie was unaware of him being a skanky man-ho.
Turns out he lacked the crabs. Saved him from itching himself. They itched him for him.
Well, and because it appeared he was at work, Dixie was none the wiser to him
smelling like
visiting
crabby.
All them prostitutes. In 1987, Charles was having regular sex with a married woman who worked secretly on the streets as a prostitute in the afternoons. She chose the afternoons for her side job because her husband would be at work and her children were in school.
At least she had a plan.
She said for a long time, Charles was sweet and a gentleman and would even give her extra money if she needed it. But later that same year, she had to call off their Friday afternoon scheduled sex sessions because Charles was beginning to become increasingly more aggressive during their encounters.
She too had the dress.
She said that Charles was also getting a bit on the weird side because he started asking her to spank him like a child.
You're like, here, take this end of that spatula.
He wanted his pants pulled down, bent over her lap, and just have his little hiney beat raw. Yeah.
Tell me I'm naughty.
He missed his mama.
Do you think she ever did it and he was just like crying? She's like, just like darty-eyed, like, what the fuck is going on?
I have no idea. But then there were other prostitutes that would later come forward and say that Charles would ask them to do a double. He would pay 2 prostitutes that he would handcuff to the bed and then begin beating them with a belt and or extension cords, all while screaming, "Bitch, you know you like it." If you can't tell, we're escalating here.
He just wanted somebody to do the same thing to him. He was just demonstrating. That's why he wanted 2, so one could watch while he paddled the other. And he's like, now you try. And they were like, Was it cute?
Well, I figure since that married lady must not have been beating him too good, that's why he needed to teach them how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
On December 13th, 1990, Mary Lou Pratt, she was 33 years old, 156 pounds, and she was a well-known prostitute. She frequently worked out of the Star Motel in Oak Cliff. That was a neighborhood just outside of South Dallas. She was found murdered on the street wearing only a t-shirt and a bra pulled up over her breasts, and her legs were spread eagle. Her body was found with her eyes shut and several facial and chest bruises. Mary had been brutally beaten before being murdered. Mary had been shot in the back of the head with a .44 caliber gun. During her autopsy, the coroner gasped, "My God, they're gone!" They opened Mary's eyelids to find that the murderer had surgically removed both of Mary's eyeballs. Mary's eyes were removed with such precision, there was no tissue left, nor was there damage to any of the upper or lower eyelids.
He had practiced.
He sure did. So there's your trophy. He collected himself some eyeballs. This is the case that made me think of Jason, by the way.
Good.
And for those that don't know, he says...
I was going to say, you're going to need to expand on that because that sounds real fucking weird, Andrea.
So when we were first together, he used to be infatuated with my eyeballs because he said that one of my eyes is hazel, the other is green. And he was fascinated with the fact that depending on what I wore or my mood, both eyes would turn green or both eyes would turn dark brown. He thinks it's super cool. So he used to say that he could just pop my eyeballs out and put them in his pocket and carry them everywhere. And I told him, that's creepy and weird.
Let's get married.
Pretty much. Turns out he's never done anything weird to my eyeballs. They're still in my skull.
But you were willing to take that gamble.
I was. It was. They say love is blind.
You almost were. You sure did roll them dice.
But when I saw this case, I was working on a different case, and I saw that he collected eyeballs, and I was like, Jason was just sitting next to me working, doing paperwork for his business, and I was sitting here, and I was like, yeah. Anyway, not funny that this guy collected eyeballs, just funny how it relates to my husband-ish.
Wanting to collect your eyeballs.
Yeah.
Good joke.
The police said it was not unusual. I am quoting this. I did not say this. I am quoting the police, okay? It was not unusual for the whores of Oak Cliff to get their share of beatings almost nightly. A girl would call the police station and complain about a trick jumping bad on her, punching her, kicking her, or even trying to run her over with a car. But for a whore to be murdered, now that is unusual. I was like, God.
All right.
Yeah. 2 months later, on February 10th, 1991, the remains of Susan Beth Peterson were found. She was a 27-year-old prostitute, and she also frequented the Star Motel. Susan was from Pennsylvania, and according to one report, she was a Navy veteran. It said that Susan was the most beautiful prostitute on the streets in Oak Cliff. She had been a prostitute for nearly 5 years and was able to pick up a whole 10 to 12 Johns per night.
Ew.
That's a... I was just curious if your brain went the same route of mine. I was like...
At first I was like, I thought you were going to be like 10 to 12 a year. It's like, oh, that doesn't seem like good business. The night is... Ugh.
No, she's definitely open for business.
Sloppy seconds for sure.
Sloppy twelfths. She would steal money from her John's wallet while they were having sex with her.
Well, her fingers were already lubed up.
She would yell at the officers if they tried to move her from her street corner. Like, she was not afraid of people.
They're cutting into her income there.
They sure were. But Susan was found on the same street Mary was found on, just outside of the Dallas city limits near DeSoto. She'd been shot in the top of her head, her left breast, and in the back of her head. But there were no signs of like a physical altercation. And just like with Mary, Susan's eyeballs had been surgically removed. So now I am going to spoil it and tell you that eventually he does get caught, obviously. But during his trial, another prostitute testifies against Charles. And now this unnamed prostitute and Susan, the one that they just found, they were picked up together by Charles one night, and he beat them severely. Or he handcuffed the woman that survives and beat her with an electric cord for 30 minutes straight. And then I think it's crazy that she was able to testify that he did this to both Susan and herself, and that Susan was still willing to go with him for another bout of abuse.
She kind of liked it,
I guess.
Or he paid her real good. She's like,
or
I don't know.
Because there were no signs of a physical altercation, and I would assume
she was beat with an extension cord. That's literally physical.
No. The girl that survived testified that Charles had beat her and Susan with an electric cord on a different time. But when Susan's found murdered, there were no signs of like a struggle. Nothing that they found unusual, I guess, other than her eyeballs being removed. But other than being murdered and having her eyeballs removed, there was no sign of like, because the other girl who had received facial beatings and stuff, or had facial bruising.
Facial beatings? I've heard of facials. I've heard of beatings. I didn't know there were just the facial beatings.
Beat in the face, okay? On March 10th, so a month later, a 41-year-old woman named Shirley Williams worked as a maid during the day and a prostitute by night. I want to know when she slept. You know what? Never mind.
I
sure don't.
She didn't need to be awake.
Shirley was found murdered. However, what threw the police is she worked at a different motel, but just a few miles down from the Star Motel, from where the other two ladies worked out of. Shirley was found propped up against a curb near an elementary school. Her remains were discovered at 6:20 in the morning by a waitress. She had been brutally beaten as well. She had obvious facial trauma. Not only did she have the bruises to her face, but she had a broken nose. She'd been shot in the face and through the top of her head. And just like with Susan and Mary, Shirley's eyeballs were also missing. This time, during the autopsy, the coroner discovered the tip of a blade that got stuck in Shirley's right eye socket, and it turns out the blade came from an X-Acto knife.
He was in a hurry.
He sure was. That's what they said, because it was in such a public spot.
Couldn't take his time. Yeah, couldn't take his time.
Right. So, and now police ended up being tipped off that Charles Albright frequently visited Mary Pratt, the first victim, and that actually Charles knew Mary from before she ever even became a prostitute. Turns out she lived on the street where Charles's parents had lived and where they had bought him his first house. He knew her from then. And then after she became a prostitute, he became one of her regulars. The tipster to the police also informed them that Charles was known among the prostitutes for being fascinated with eyeballs. Detectives reached out to the local working gals and found out that Charles had assaulted several of them hard-working ladies, and the detectives ended up talking to a woman named Tina who had one heck of a story to tell. Charles was one of her regulars, and he had been fairly kind to her until the last time they went out together. Apparently he got rough, and when she got out of his car and ran from him, Tina ended up getting into a different vehicle, but before she did, she saw Shirley, the gal that was just murdered, standing outside in her yellow raincoat as Charles drove by. When Tina was done doing her business and returned to her spot, Shirley was gone. She escorted detectives to the field where she and Charles would often go to have sex, and detectives found an old blue blanket, some used condoms, and a wadded up yellow raincoat that looked like the one that Shirley was wearing when she was last seen. The raincoat had blood all over it. Another girl, who was a 26-year-old prostitute named Veronica Rodriguez, said that Charles beat her nearly to death. He sliced her throat and cut her forehead before he began to beat her while he raped her. She ended up bringing the officers to the house where the assault occurred. The home belonged to Charles, but was still in Charles's dead adopted father's name. These complaints from all the prostitutes led to probable cause for a search warrant for Charles's home and other properties associated with Charles. In the wee hours of March 22nd, 1991, the elite tactical squad surrounded Charles's home. They called the home to see if a man would answer, and when he did, the team moved in. They smashed a window, and stun grenades were tossed inside, while others broke through the door.
And then they find out he was renting it.
Charles asked later, "Why didn't they just knock on the door? He would have answered." Dixie sat up from her bed.
Because we heard he liked it rough.
Well, Dixie, she sat up in her bed and she's screaming, wanting to know what the hell's going on. They hauled Dixie and Charles down to the police station for questioning. During their search, police found several different X-Acto knives, red condoms, which matched the ones found at a couple of the crime scenes.
Red?
Yeah, they're red condoms. I have no idea. The other case I was working on when I found this one, that guy used yellow condoms. I didn't realize they came in rainbow color.
Yeah, maybe it's how they sized him.
Maybe. Well, they found the red condoms. They found Nazi literature and dolls with their eyes cut out. They also found books about serial killers and a .44 Magnum revolver. At the police station, Dixie stood by her. There's no way Charles could have done any of the things that they were saying that he did. He done went to work and he'd come home. They tried to rattle her by pointing out that she was postmenopausal, which, fuck you, for all the women out there, you fucking assholes.
Does that have to do anything?
Right? But the police were like, we done tried to tell her.
She's just blinking at him. What?
Yeah.
It's but like, they were like, no, it's possible. There's a full moon out tonight. What?
They were like, you're postmenopausal. So why does Charles need condoms? And Dixie, she's like, I don't care. He's innocent.
It's because he got in trouble for spanking it in his tube sock and leaving it in the laundry hamper. That's why.
Dixie did admit that she was not aware that Charles had a previous criminal history, but all she cared about and all she knew that he was in bed with her every night, and when her alarm went off, he would be back from his paper route, and he was there. So there was no way in her mind that he was killing prostitutes. On March 23rd, 1991, so a mere 13 days after Charles had killed Shirley, he was officially arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder, plus a 4th count for an unsolved 1988 murder of another young woman named Rhonda Bowie. She, like Charles's other victims, worked the dangerous job of a prostitute. She was beaten, shot, and also had her eyeballs cut out. Charles's trial began December 2nd, 1991. Sadly, the revolver that was recovered from his property did not match the murder weapon for Mary, Susan, or Shirley, but they did find the hairs consistent to Shirley on a blanket in his possession, as well as inside their vacuum cleaner in their home. 8 hairs to be exact that matched Shirley Williams came from Charles's vacuum cleaner. 6 of Shirley's hairs were on the blue blanket that was found at the field where the yellow coat was found. 3 pubic hairs from the same blanket matched Charles. Head hair, I'm going to be specific as to where that hair came from, but it was a piece of hair on the raincoat that matched his, from his head. He also had his pubic hair match one strand that was lifted off of Shirley's neck.
Ew.
I thought I'd just let you marinate on that for a second. Charles's head hair was also found near a wound on Shirley's face, another on her back, and 2 on her left hand. So I feel like he just really needed to manscape or bathe and scrub that region to get all those loose hairs off. But he's just like sprinkling his pubes everywhere.
He did manscape. He just didn't brush them off.
Well, 3 head hairs from Susan Peterson were on that blanket in Charles's truck, and 4 hairs suspected to be from Mary Pratt. There was also squirrel hair found in the vacuum and on the blanket that were picked up from the field.
The fuck? The squirrel did it? And he made off with that handgun. You and your goddamn hairs. That was a weird tidbit to throw in.
Right? It was just random in the court documents.
The squirrel could have done it.
And there was squirrel hair. I was just like, all right. So that's all the evidence that was presented, or a lot of the evidence that was presented to the jury. However, the prosecution's case began to fall apart because that yellow raincoat that was covered in blood that Shirley was last seen wearing somehow disappeared during the trial after it was shown to the jury. And also, a prostitute named Veronica, who had previously claimed that Charles had attacked her, withdrew her story, claiming that she was coerced by the police to make that shit up. She even ended up testifying for Charles, stating Charles never harmed her, he just had sex with her. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the hair, which is why I mentioned all the hairs that were found.
He had a squirrel accomplice.
Yeah. So, even though the hairs linked him to the Rhonda Bowie, he was cleared because he had an alibi. I couldn't find what the alibi was, but I highly suspect that it was his wife, or a common law wife, because she just couldn't wrap her little brain hole around the fact that he was a murderer. On December 18th, so 5 days later, the jury deliberated over the mostly circumstantial evidence brought against Charles, and they found him guilty of only the murder of Shirley Williams. He was sentenced to life without parole. Charles Albright died in the West Texas Regional Medical Facility in Texas on August 22nd, 2020. He remained fascinated with eyeballs until the day he died. Fun fact time, during Charles's trial, it was suggested that another criminal who had recently skipped town and went by the name of Speedy, he rented one of the properties from Charles and used Charles' home address as his own address. But it's suspected that he committed the murders because at the property he lived at, they found an empty box of .44 caliber ammunition, as well as several rare silver-tipped bullets, which were inside the home that Speedy was living in. And they were the same type of bullet that killed 2 of the prostitutes. Speedy also had Charles's address, like I said, on his ID. But the police never looked into whether or not he did it. They just said Charles did it. Another fun fact, the murder weapon and the missing eyeballs were never found.
Oh, shit. Never says anything about what he did with the eyeballs, or he just never admits to doing it?
He never admits to doing it. He claims he was innocent. And the thing is like, it's kind of shocking that he was found guilty, because it's not like, other than telling his wife he wasn't having sex with prostitutes, I don't think it's uncommon to find the pubes and all of the DNA on them. If he's admitting, yeah, I had sex with prostitutes, yeah, he might have lied about it because he's trying to save his marriage. However, they didn't have anything else on him that tied him to the murders other than the fact that he was fascinated with eyeballs. That is Charles Albright. Sick son bitch that may or may not have done gone around collecting them eyeballs.
Thank you for that.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Claire.
I'm Andy.
Follow us each week to get your fix of the atrocities that occur in true crime. And don't forget to tell people about us and rate us if you like us. But don't rate us if you didn't. Just change the